So this story featured on TVNZ. I mean, you're probably aware of the New Zealand news story last year where 4 drivers won a case to say they aren't contractors. What they are is actually employees. That's a part of what's going around at the world at the moment. What's happening actually, Chewie, and I think this was mentioned after the podcast was finished. I didn't know this, but apparently what's happening at the moment is Brooke Van Velden is trying to pass legislation that says if you sign a contract as a contractor, you can only be a contractor, nothing else. So if a company hires you as a contractor, but they treat you as an employee, if you've signed a contract to be a contractor, that's all you can ever be. That's apparently a plan that this government's trying to put through at the moment. And so I guess I'd say, I just wonder how the Uber donation box is going for the National Party / right-wing parties at the moment, because they would like that one. So anyway, this is a Uber story about them paying not very much tax in New Zealand. I'll show you a bit of Craig's podcast and explain what's coming up tomorrow as well.
Uber is being accused of not paying its fair share of taxes.
It's funny they say being accused, because I think they paid about 1.2 million in tax. So they're being accused paying 1.2 million tax and they take out more than 100 million. So it's not just like they're not paying, it's they're being accused of it, even though we know what the numbers are.
Here, a new report claims the rideshare service shifted millions of dollars overseas in what it calls intercompany service fees in order to lower its New Zealand tax bill. But as Katie Stevenson reports, the company says it's paid the right amount.
Many Kiwis use Uber to get around. The popular rideshare app launched here in 2014. Now there are claims the multinational company isn't paying its fair share of tax.
The New Zealand government ends up missing out on tens of millions of dollars worth of tax revenue, corporate tax revenue that we should be getting from them.
According to Uber's most recently available annual report, in 2023 the company made $365 million in revenue here, but reported a profit of $4.5 million.
The vast majority of revenue that they...
Did you get that? What did they say? 350 million, 4.5 million in profit in New Zealand, paid 1.2 million in tax. I mean, it's good finances if you can make it work.
Book on their financial reporting here in New Zealand is sent offshore as what they call intercompany service fees. But that money should be being booked here as corporate profits before being sent offshore as dividends to the parent company.
As a result, Uber paid $1.2 million in corporate tax. In a statement, Uber says it is a significant tax contributor.
Just think about that. They took in over 350 million in New Zealand and they paid 1.2 million. So that's like 1/3 of 1%. Remember how we have these conversations around a fair amount of tax to pay, and now those at the top don't pay their fair share? I would suggest, and remember, when they write off losses, their losses will not be New Zealand based, because the losses are all the stuff to build the thing in America, right? So the money they take in New Zealand is basically all profit. But there's ways they can do it to ship it offshore and put it through that, that company, that shell company, and then they say, well, but only 4.5 million was profit of that 350 million. Just remember again how we constantly say, all we want is a fair tax system. Fair. So they have taken $350 million out of our economy, and they've paid $1.2 million on tax on that. Sorry, Chewie, you're going to say something?
I was going to say, obviously, razor thin margins. Razor thin.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when their overheads are so massive. Well, hang on, no, the drivers own their own cars and the drivers pay their fees. And
the infrastructure that they have to...
the taxpayers pay for that. Yeah. Right. Yeah, interesting. All right, we'll keep going.
Significant tax contributor in New Zealand and complies with its tax obligations.
If the $200 million in intercompany service fees, which we believe are profits that have been shifted to a different jurisdiction, had been booked here in New Zealand, then that would have netted, at a base assumption, around about $50 to $60 million in corporate tax.
Calling for greater transparency.
We need to see greater disclosure requirements on multinational digital companies to ensure that more of the benefit is able to be booked here to fund decent public services and public investment and infrastructure.
We're losing. They are exploiting the system that is built on.
And these are the drivers who won that case to be employees. So there's two stories here. There's how much tax they're paying, and it's how Uber is, I want to say treating, but probably more accurate is classifying their drivers.
Exploiting the system that is built on, and the government's responsibility to step up and saying, no, we stand for our country, we stand for our people, you cannot do this.
It comes as the case of 4 Uber drivers who were deemed employees rather than contractors by the Employment Court heads to the Supreme Court next week after Uber appealed the ruling.
The process was painful to see them arguing that we deserve less, and Uber telling us they are not a transport company.
Gearing up for a bumpy road ahead. Katie Stevenson, One News.
So there you go, Chewie. So that's the general story. The New Zealand version of it is how much tax are you paying in New Zealand? And next week, next Tuesday, we find out. I believe to get to the Supreme Court, they've already gone through one layer of courts where they lost again. I think, I can be correct, but I think that means Uber's lost twice in the courts, and this is their last shot. Something I'll tell you, which I'm not going to, you won't see in the little snippet I'm about to play you, or maybe you do. Uber doesn't consider the person sitting in the cab to be their customer.
No.
They consider the driver to be their customer. And this is part of the problem. So the person sitting in the car, the customer to the driver sitting in the car, that person pays Uber, books their ride through Uber. Uber then pays the driver. But the way Uber get around this is they say they have no relationship to the person sitting in the back seat. They say their customer is the driver who pays a fee to use their platform. So again, when we say we want a fair tax system and those with money have the lawyers and the accountants to find holes in the tax system, this is the example. $350 million, more than $200 million being shipped offshore with no tax. New Zealand's missing out on about $50 to $60 million in tax from Uber. This is the example of what we're talking about, Chewie.
This is the system working as intended.
Yes,
This
true.
is Uber's complete business model and has been everywhere it operates.
Yeah.
People
Which is why
said
they
when
can say
came-
we're paying everything we need to. They are
Yeah.
playing within the rules. That's why the rules need to change. Thank you, Chloe.
Yeah, absolutely. And for what we were talking about before of like their absolutely fudged numbers of what their profits were and how much tax they were paid. It's those figures that governments will turn around and go, well, we can't possibly tax them more because they've got such razor thin margins because of their creative accounting, which they won't show us, and that we won't compel them to show us. But we don't want to lose them. They're a massive employer. According to Uber, they're not a massive employer. So
they
which
don't
one-
employ anyone.
Which one is it? They don't. They want the drivers to be contractors because then they don't have to pay them holidays. Then they don't have to pay them penalty rates. Then they don't have to
100%.
pay ACC or any of that sort of thing. They're on the hook for fucking nothing.
Yeah.
And look, as we went to there was a little discussion in the chat there. That Uber wouldn't be as successful as it was if the taxi companies weren't so shit. And I agree with that too. It is a classic example. This is why Uber exploded, is because of general dissatisfaction with traditional taxi operators.
Yeah.
And they came in with a hiss and a roar, and a lot of people went, well, hang on. This is a classic thing, right? They come in with the big discounts. They come in with a product that is cheaper, easier to use. You know, it's on an app where you don't have to fucking call a taxi company and all of this bullshit. And people gravitated to it because it was great. And it put so much pressure on the taxi companies that then the taxi companies started to fold. And then the only other option that you have is Uber. Or other versions of Uber, but the same sort of thing. Here in Dunedin, we've got some taxi companies still hanging on. And then there's, because the initial people that came in to drive for Uber doing pretty good. Payout rates were really good. They were popular, and so more and more drivers come on board, more and more drivers to dilute the pool. Suddenly the payouts aren't so good, in comes Uber Eats. Here's another way for you to make money as an Uber contractor, but now you're a food delivery driver, and we pay you even less. Talk to an Uber driver. See how much power they have in that relationship as a customer of Uber.
Here, I'll show you something. I'll give you a tiny
yanked from the platform at the drop of a hat with no recourse. And for a lot of people, this is their job. This is their employment. There is nothing else. They're full-time Uber drivers.
I'll give you a
Huge
tiny
hours.
tease. And this is not what I'm going to show you now. This is coming up in Craig's podcast tomorrow morning. You were just talking about Uber Eats. This is the breakdown of our Uber Eats at the moment, their quarterly gross bookings. And you can see that delivery is half of what the Uber Eats, what the Uber thing does. Up the top there is freight, so couriers basically, and down the bottom there is mobility, so people. So you can see Uber Eats is actually now pretty much, it's not quite half, is it? But it's 45% of their business. So that's what they're doing. So Uber Eats is still making it, and I tell you what, I've pretty much stopped doing that, and I stopped doing Uber Eats when I saw that. Not that we really do McDonald's anymore, but back in the day, all of a sudden I realized, there's all these different prices for these burgers. Why aren't these burgers the same price on Uber Eats as they are going into McDonald's? And it's because Uber Eats is actually shafting the restaurants as well. And they're taking such a scraping out of it that for a restaurant to actually make their product still as profitable online on Uber Eats, they have to up the prices. So it's actually Uber Eats is making off you and the businesses and still getting what they want. And everyone else, the business is getting less and we're paying more. It's bad for all of us. So I very rarely do it anymore. Actually, the only time I do Uber Eats now is when I'm in Auckland and my kids go, Dad, can you Uber Eats us some food? I'm like, yeah, I guess that's okay because you're pathetic and I'm still your father looking after you. But that's sort of the only time. I've stopped doing it. I've stopped doing it because of that. And then you got the delivery fee as well. So you're paying more for your food, you're paying a delivery fee, and ultimately when it turns up, it's not as good because it's been sitting in someone's car for 10 to 20 minutes. Sorry,
and look,
little sideways rant there at the end, but
if you want to grab a different app because you don't want to use Uber, well, guess what? It'll just be another Uber driver who's double apping.
Or triple apping.
It's triple apping, that sort of thing. Like a lot of these Silicon Valley disruption companies, right? There might be a kernel of a good idea there. A kernel of like, what is something that people don't like about taxis, right? Let's see if we can solve that problem. But then as soon as you scratch the surface, it's a tax scam. It's always a fucking tax scam. How can we rip off the operators? How can we rip off the customers? And how can we rip off the government all at the same time is going to make us enormously wealthy. Think of a popular service like Spotify is in the news at the moment because their CEO likes to funnel his personal fortune that he gets from ripping off artists into military AI. All of this is bad. And it's just all of these, here in New Zealand, we're so prone to profit extraction by foreign companies. Our banks are mostly foreign. Our supermarkets are mostly foreign. Uber, Spotify, Netflix, all of these companies are just extracting money from us, and the government is letting them do it. They need to get mean, and they need to go, New Zealanders want nice stuff. They want their ferry terminal to look like it's not a sharing shed in the off season. They want some hospitals, and we need to be mean to these operators because they will still make money from this country, even if we close some tax loopholes for them and stop listening to them cry about it.
I spoke with Craig in just an off-the-cuff moment about that idea that I think somebody in the chat came up with, or maybe you came up with, Chewie, about every dollar that gets taken offshore should be taxed at 90%. And Craig said we have it probably you're not able to do it because of our free trade agreements, that would be in conflict with them. But I'm getting to a point where I'm like, and something has to change. I actually don't hate that idea. If Uber wants to come here and make Uber amounts of cash, stacks of cash, cool, but it goes back into New Zealand or it gets taxed significantly to leave our shores. You know, I mean, and I do think, and I was thinking about this just yesterday, actually. I don't know why, because we had that conversation around Fonterra. I think there could be legislation that says something like, you know, maybe once you do 50% or more than 50% of your trade is international, and I'm pretty sure Fonterra would be that, most of their trade is international, then actually there's some restrictions on what you can charge someone in New Zealand. You know, because it's the public health system that looks after your workers when they go down. It's the public provided roads that your trucks drive down to pick up the milk. You know, it's all these things. It's the public schools that trained your people who are now. So actually, you didn't do this on your own, farmers or Fonterra. The public sector added to the skills and the amount that you've been able to make off those. I think a bit of payback would be good. And I actually do think there's an argument to be had for limiting what a local company who has a huge international presence can charge local people. I don't agree, and was it Luxon who said this? Isn't it great that they get their export prices here? No, it's not. A Fonterra product landing in Perth in Australia have added nothing to that product through their existence. They haven't supported the farmers. They haven't supported Fonterra. Their local tax system hasn't covered all the years that Fonterra ran at a loss. All you do is drop the product at the port in Perth and get your money. Whereas this country has given you things to get to where you are. It's time to pay it back. And you pay it back by having some kind of freeze on how much you can charge local sales. I don't think that's obnoxiously difficult, Chewie.
No, none of it is. And it's always funny when okay, so we've got a business-focused government in power and that sort of thing.
Well, so called.
Yes, so called. And it always seems when it comes to these big international companies that they're just like, oh no, we can't scare them away. You know, we've got to give them these tax breaks that they get overseas. No, we don't. No, we don't. And maybe if you just squeeze them a little bit, then we get more out of it. Like I don't see why a company like Uber that operates like Uber gets to pay less tax than a person does. Like this is the whole thing, right? Of like they're squealing about rivers gaining personhood, or you know they want corporations to have the benefits of an individual, but with none of the downsides. And it's like, cool, you want to operate Uber, pay fucking 33% tax.
Yeah.
You don't. I fucking do. What makes you different, Uber?
It's that theory of privatizing profits and socializing losses. That's what companies.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, let's have a look at this. I'm just going to give you the first 60 seconds. This is tomorrow's podcast with Craig. And as you can see, he has Ed for 25 minutes. As you saw the graph I've just shown you, they go much more into the bigger picture around Uber. Really good podcast, really worth checking out. This is the tease at the start of the podcast.
So when you take an Uber, you pull up the app on your phone. Yeah, you get Uber, the company, to provide you with a ride, a driver. You pay Uber, you hop in the car. It's an Uber driver that picks you up. At the end of it, that's Uber that pays the driver. Uber controls the whole transaction, and therefore they should be considered the driver should be considered at least some kind of worker. But if you look at the filings for Uber, they don't think that drivers are their workers, whether it's employees or contractors, at all. The base assumption that runs through all of the filings in all of those jurisdictions that I mentioned is that drivers are actually the consumers of the product. The product is the platform. Drivers pay a service fee to the company, to Uber, to be able to use that and get connected with the with the end user. And the end user and the driver, in Uber's mind, contract directly with one another. In Uber's mind, there is no relationship between them and the end user.
So that's the person who's sitting in the back seat. So that's the start of tomorrow's podcast with Craig Rennie, Locked Out. And it's a good one. I was fascinated listening to it today. So check it out.
You know what's just popped into my tiny little shriveled pea brain now?
Sure, tell us.
That's almost like, I wonder if there would be an argument there that the Uber drivers are franchise holders.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's the traditional thing, right? You want to start up a business and you want to have the brand recognition of a much bigger company, like like a McDonald's, right? You
Yeah.
didn't come up with McDonald's; it's not your
Yep.
recipe; it's someone else's recipe. But you want to
Yep.
buy in, so you're the customer in that case, right? You want to be a franchise holder to get the recognition, to get the customers. It's almost like that sort of arrangement.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we're interested to see what happens from here. Let's jump into some of the chats.
Yes.
It's in the ballots.
Paul's got it. It's exactly the same as courier drivers because they're franchise holders.
Yeah, true.